Football is important. It's the most important thing.
And welcome back to the NFLandU podcast, everybody. It is Friday, January 8th, and after months of dredging through the regular season, we have finally reached the postseason. It is wild card weekend, people, one of the best weekends of the year, and this is what all that hard work was for. I am your host, as always, Hayden, joined by the always fantastic Mr. Mark Hogan. Mark, how you doing, my man?
Yeah, what's up? Lovely intro into wildcard weekend. It is the best weekend in football. It'll be interesting to see how good it is compared to other years now that we have the 7th seed. We'll get into it later on. It'll be interesting to hear our thoughts and your thoughts and the number 7 playing the 2 seed. I mean, when we look at Chicago playing New Orleans, I think it could be pretty lopsided. And it's like, was all that fun and games that we've had in a wide open race in the NFC for the 7 seed, will it all be for nothing when you just have to make the Saints trot out for an extra week when they just go and steamroll a team? So yeah, it's interesting, and I'm glad that it's here. Best weekend in football. It kind of goes downhill from here, getting less and less games the whole time, but certainly excited for now.
Yeah, just less and less games until we get to the big one, the Super Bowl here in a couple weeks. But listen, like Mark said, like it looks lopsided on paper, like that one specific matchup, but anything is possible in the postseason. That's what these teams always tell themselves. Just get into the dance and anything is possible. And it happens every year. There's always at least one upset that nobody really thought could happen, or some wild finish like Buffalo and Houston last year where Josh Allen cratered in the fourth quarter of the game. Like nobody saw that coming, and then there we were watching it unfold. So wild card weekend, it's just a bevy of opportunities, and we can't wait to get into every single game. And then make sure to stick around to the very end of the show. We're going to talk about the coaching carousel around the league and talk about every single head coaching opening. It's going to be fantastic. So make sure you stick around to that. But we're of course going to dissect every single wild card game this week, and it's a pretty good slate, I would say. It's not fantastic, but it's not bad either. I think it's pretty good.
No, I think it's excellent, and we'll start off now. But it's definitely something I'm going to bear in mind, that there's usually an upset when we're picking these games. If anyone wants to check out our picks this week, we won't be going through them one by one as we usually do, because we actually have a surprise. We're going to do a bit of a bumper selection. You can explain to them, Hayden, if you want, about our guest picker situation going forward.
Yeah, so we decided that we had a lot of great guest pickers this year, from Pro Football Mania to Jelani Brown. We just wanted to have them all back on one more time to help pick the games for us. And that's what we're doing this week. We got them all back individually, and they gave us our picks. And that's what our guest picker situation is. It's not just one of them this week. Now it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Correct, Mark? 5.
Yeah, we have Jelani and Pro Football Mania, like you said. We have Stu, the Kilter Cardinal from Scotland. We have James Hill, who was our Bucks fan. We have our Cup guy, Custom Sports and Mugs, because his picks were fantastic that week. And I mean, I would love to have some of the others back. Dave Fitz, Jets David, or Jets UK David, was a really nice guy, and Jacqueline from last week. But I honestly can't say why we didn't get them all back, other than there was space in the graphic, and these guys are the most recent in my DMs. So I'm sorry we couldn't have all. Honest to God, I'm sorry that we couldn't have everyone on. And yeah, look, I hope that we can still have a bit of fun. There's going to be 7 of us doing it now, and it'll definitely give a bit of variation. I know from some of the picks that are going to be going out in the graphic, some of the guys, there's definitely going to be some islands this week. Bar 1 or 2 of the games that are going to be lopsided. But yeah, it's excellent. But no, I mean, we should absolutely get into it, Hayden. And no, I think maybe start with the Baltimore-Tennessee game.
Yes, the best game of the weekend, Mark. The 5th-seeded Baltimore Ravens going to Tennessee to take on the 4th-seeded Titans. If you aren't excited for this game, you don't love football, in my opinion. This is going to be a slobber knocker.
God, I mean, I hope I'm excited about football then, because not that I'm unexcited about it, but to me, there's a lot on the line, and I see it going one way now. I said about a game last week was going to go one way with New York beating Dallas, and that one blew up my face. I said I wouldn't call a one-way game again. I think I'm like 0-15 on that kind of shape this year. But when I look at Baltimore playing Tennessee, I see, and I actually mentioned in my power rankings the other day about how Baltimore's skate has helped them to avoid the same pitfalls and the traps that cost them last year. And what I meant by that when I was saying it was kind of like I was thinking about the big trust comment that was made last year by Mark Ingram, and how Baltimore just had this wall-to-wall coverage when they're going into the playoffs. That this was the most exciting offense that we'd seen in years. and no one was going to beat them, that Patrick Mahomes had his time and it was gone. Lamar was here and he was the MVP. Game over. New era of football, and there was only one team going to dominate. And what comes out but Tennessee in the playoffs, and they go and beat Baltimore. Kevin Boyard, the safety, is running to the locker room afterwards and he's shouting big trust. The wide receiver TJ Sharp goes and introduces Derrick Henry in a press conference that mocked when the big trust comment had happened and Mark Ingram had introduced Lamar Jackson. And they just simply owned them, really. They were in their heads at that point. And when did it people begin this year? Week 11, Tennessee is playing Baltimore and goes and stands in the logo. Do you remember we broke that game down? We didn't like it at all. The antics that had gone down before it. And that's kind of gone now this week in terms of Baltimore isn't letting it get to them. Even going back to a week ago, they're going into Cincinnati to win a spot in the playoffs, are Baltimore. Jermaine Pratt at Cincinnati's Jermaine Pratt comes out and says that no, forget about it, Baltimore can't beat us. And J.K. Dobbins is asked about that and he's like, no, same focus on the game, forget about it. And it's good now because they're so composed. There's no outside voices really getting into that locker room and it's all positive. I mean, we're super excited about this Baltimore team. I just think they're absolutely phenomenal. And it's going against the Tennessee side that actually doesn't match up too well with them. It's kind of shocking that they went to overtime that day. And I think it was just because Tennessee was in Baltimore's head. But like in a game that has two run-centric offenses, I pick Baltimore's hands down every time. I just think the Baltimore's offense, like I know the running game stuttered there for a while, but I just think that they got their house in order and they're better now. So even Derrick Henry and all the play action that Ryan Tannehill does, I'd still take Baltimore's offense over it. And then the defense is the worst defense in the playoffs. They couldn't do anything this year. They ranked fourth against the pass. They were bottom half of the league in completion percentage in the rush. They gave up ninth most yards, and only the Jags and the Bengals had fewer sacks than Tennessee's defense. So the one thing that they did right in Tennessee was they were able to get some takeaways.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't count on takeaways happening. And the easy solution for it is stay away from Malcolm Butler when you're throwing the ball if you're Lamar Jackson. So, yeah, I'm just too high on Baltimore, and I think that Tennessee's antics last year are kind of going to come back to haunt them.
You know, as Mark laid out there, that these two teams have played twice over the last, year and a half at this point. And I really view this game through that lens as like, even though they're not talking about it through the media, and like Mark said, there's kind of this kind of calm, centric feeling emanating from Baltimore right now. I truly view this as these two teams genuinely do not like each other, like one bit. Like when they came in and embarrassed them in the playoffs last year, because that's what that was. It was embarrassing what happened to Baltimore in the divisional round. And then they come into their house earlier this season. That was right in the middle of Baltimore's kind of slump in the middle of the season where they just couldn't figure out anything to do right. And Tennessee comes into the house, stands on their logo, embarrasses them, and then beats them in overtime with a Derrick Henry literally running in an L formation on the winning touchdown run, literally handing them an L. And now they're meeting again, this time in Tennessee's turf. I promise you, this is going to get chippy. These two teams do not like each other one bit. And you go back and you look at these two games and you ask yourself, how did Tennessee do it? They literally just let Derrick Henry run. In the divisional round last year, he ran for 195 yards. In the week 10, week 11 game earlier this season, he ran for 133 yards and a couple touchdowns. They just could not stop him the first two times. So if you're Baltimore, the solution is simple. You sell out everything to stop Derrick Henry. I know Ryan Tannehill in that offense can still be dangerous through the air. I know A.J. Brown is a lethal weapon. Trust me, I had him on fantasy. I know they can put up points. But the point is, you cannot allow this man to run roughshod all over your defense again. You just cannot allow it under any single circumstance. In fact, if you can take him out of the equation, I think they win this game easily if they can find a way to neutralize Derrick Henry. Because the way this Baltimore offense is rolling right now, it's on a different stratosphere. It's just like what we saw at the end of the season last year. They're emulating it almost to perfection again. The running game's going. J.K. Dobbins is going off. And then because that's going off, Lamar Jackson is now in his wheelhouse. He can run with it. He can throw with it. He can do whatever. And like Mark pointed out, that Tennessee Titans defense has not been good this year. It has been muy mal, very bad. And it's been an Achilles heel all year. It's going to finally bite them in the rear end this weekend when they face a good offense in the Ravens. But the only thing that's holding me back from pounding the table and saying, oh, the Ravens are going to win this game for sure, is that their recent playoff history has not been good, Mark. They have come out looking flat and just unenergetic the last 2 years in their first playoff game. You go back to Lamar's rookie year when they played the Chargers in the first round, they just got mollywopped. They got pushed around. They got bullied. Then last year, the first game against the Titans, what happened again? They got mollywopped. They got bullied. They got out physical. They got embarrassed. I am very afraid if they come out and do the same thing, they just look unenergetic. They just don't look into it, and they just get embarrassed again. I'm really scared that's what's going to be a defining label for this Ravens team under Lamar, is that, okay, they can play good in the regular season, but they can't do it in the postseason. And that's why this game is so important for Lamar Jackson and these Ravens. They need to come out and show people that they can win in the postseason. Because fool me once, what is it? Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. What happens if they fool us for a third time? What happens then? I'm going to take the Ravens to win this one, but they really need to show up and beat a team that's bullied them the last 2 times.
Yeah, I think that's why I point to this mindset that they have now of getting over not those fears, but they know to take Tennessee straight on and not let any of the mind games get to them or whatever, what have you. I think that, I suppose, they didn't play too well this season, so you can't say that their calling card is going to be good in the offseason or good in the season, regular season, and bad in the postseason, because I think that they just have timed this to perfection. That they had their little wobble. It's actually the Tennessee game that kind of triggered in week 11 their decline and the questioning around them that happened for a couple of weeks, because then the next day is when the COVID scare really kicked in. So yeah, look, I'm picking Baltimore as well. I know that Stewart, I should say, Cardinal Skelton has gone for Tennessee, Jelani Raven. But I know that someone's going for Tennessee, but for me, Baltimore is just too hot right now, and there's just, I suppose, such an X that will have been put on Tennessee that John Harbaugh is the kind of guy that gets it done on the field. And I think that, yeah, I if we did locks and stuff, I'd surely lock up Baltimore now, because this is certainly a close game. It's only a 3-point swing to Baltimore. The bookies have it, so it is a very close game. That's what you get in the playoffs, especially when the number 4 seed is playing the 5. Which my faith is in Baltimore this weekend.
Wow, so confident you feel like you could lock it up. Wow, I like it. I like
Put on
it.
A t-shirt.
Just Mark's face with a little lock on it on a white t-shirt. So that's the Baltimore-Tennessee game. It's the game I'm personally most excited for, just considering these last 2 teams' history. But that's not the only game happening this weekend, if we can move on from that one now, Mark, if you're cool with it. Because the Chicago Bears, the 8th seed in the NFC, not the 8th seed, the 7th seed in the NFC, if I can learn how to count, is going to New Orleans to take on the 2nd seeded Saints in one of the NFC matchups. And all right, people, I know the Bears, they legitimately, literally backed into the playoffs after they got just murdered by the Packers. There's no way getting around that. They got murdered by the Packers this past Sunday. And they are only getting in because, unfortunately, Mark's Cardinals lost their game against the Rams, which does suck, but it means the Bears are here and we have to deal with them. Now, the main talking point the last couple of weeks that Mark and I have done about the Bears is that ever since Trubisky came back in after he got benched, the Bears offense looked a lot better. And it did. I'm not going to come in here and harp on it. But the point is that when that offense kind of started to take off and look better, their defense did the exact opposite and just took a nosedive for a while. And I'm going to read you some numbers here for this one, because as soon as Trubisky came back in over that 5-game stretch, the Bears defense gave up an average of 24 points per game. And that may not sound like a lot, and you may think, oh, okay, that's manageable. But look at the scores that they allowed other offenses to come in and put up. A game against the Lions, they gave up 34 points. A game against Houston, the Texans, they only gave up 7 points. That's pretty good. Then the next game, 27 points. Then the very next game, 17 points against the Jaguars. And then this last game, 35 points against the Packers. So outside of one really good game against the Texans and then one pretty good half against the Jaguars, that 17-point number I just gave you, this Bears defense has been getting torched lately. And that does include that they played, the Vikings, who have potential to be pretty good, and the Packers, who are also offensive juggernauts. But that 34 points that I mentioned at the very beginning of that 5-game stretch, that's the Detroit Lions. Not exactly an offensive juggernaut. Not exactly known for lighting up the skies right now, especially under head coach Darren Bevel, interim head coach Darren Bevel. So what I'm trying to articulate here is that I know I've made my bones about the Saints offense and, all their issues throughout the season, but this Bears defense is literally ripe for the picking for any team right now. And that Trubisky and that offense, who had a really bad outing, the whole team had a bad outing against the Packers, have to find a way to dust themselves off and play a pretty close to perfect game against a pretty good Saints defense in order to just have a chance, in my opinion. I know we're going to talk about it more here in a second about Drew Brees and what this game could mean to him, but I feel like the Saints team is going to come out energized. And my God, I worked at these notes for hours, and I tried to find a way that the Bears could win this game other than maybe the Saints bus runs out of gas on the way to the stadium and they just don't show up. I just don't see it happening for the Bears in this one.
Yeah, you're right with there's two sides of the coin that you're after giving us there. If you start with the offense briefly, yeah, you don't know as of the recording right now on Thursday if Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara are going to play. I mean, I would expect Michael Thomas to play. He was limited in practice. They're going to put him out there at least a bit. I suppose you don't know how effectively he's going to play, but I expect because it's the playoffs, you pull out all the stops. Alvin Kamara, it's not really in their hands. It's whether he gets a positive or if he's clear of COVID. It's the only way he's returning. I saw that he's practicing remotely with his team. I guess they have cameras on him and telling him how to run the ball or whatever. And I guess that offense hasn't been the same of late. I mean, obviously Drew Brees missed a ton of time, and there was kind of a couple of question marks. I mean, I'm still high on the offense. The running game is just so fantastic that it gives it a chance, but Drew Brees was kind of having to rely on some shorter passing, but again, that's because Michael Thomas had been out. But it is a question mark going forward. Don't get me wrong. I just expect it to be able to survive this game. And then if there's questions going forward, it's almost like we'll deal with those next week because it all hinges on the defense really for New Orleans. I, as a Cardinals fan, was looking into it, because if the Cardinals had gotten the number 7 seed, I mean, they could have gotten into the number 6 seed or whatever. But I did text my buddy saying that we could be enemies in a couple of weeks' time, and I was kind of watching the New Orleans Saints. I mean, it's not to be, but like you said there, the Bears offense is ripe for the picking, and I just think that this matchup from the defense is just ferocious for them. Football Outsiders is this cool stat. It's defensive variance. So, the looks that a defense gives you. And they said New Orleans was second in that. I mean, that means they could come out with any combination of defensive backs or linebackers. You can't really dissect what the play is going to be because you don't know if there's going to be help on the back end or if there's going to be a pass rush coming from those linebackers. And I suppose the plan for them is to be a really sound secondary, have your likes of Marshawn Lattimore and Malcolm Jenkins buying time for the pass rush. I mean, the pass rush wasn't extremely successful, but it's still daunting. And once the likes of your Marshawn Lattimores and Cam Jordans and stuff can get into the game, or sorry, your Marcus Davenports and Cam Jordans can get into the game, it's certainly going to be scary for the likes of Trubisky, who has struggled massively, especially against top defenses over the years. Matt Nagy's offense is obviously not working at its best right now anyway. And when your quarterback has questions and, they just got blown up by Green Bay last week, I just think it could be an absolute nightmare that it's the New Orleans Saints defense that just should win this game because they just completely shut down Chicago's offense.
Exactly. That's basically what this game boils down to for the Bears is we're asking Mitch Trubisky to have the game of his life in order for them to really have a chance. And when it comes down to that, you have to understand how slim the margins of error are for the Bears. They are vastly outmatched. They are vastly outclassed. And we know that home field advantage is very different this year for teams in the playoffs. There's not really going to be any fans, and it's going to be pretty quiet in the usual Deaf Dome, what they call the New Orleans Saints home in the postseason. It's going to be a lot easier to manage, but it's still a very tough stage to walk into to try to play your best football.
I'm just looking. I'm just looking back. Yeah, 100%. I suppose the players are up for, like we said earlier on, it's a new season. And that's why we're saying that the number 7 seed can match up with the number 2 seed sometimes. But
Yeah.
I'm just looking back through who the Saints even played this year. And like they played far superior offenses and were able to not shut them down, but certainly keep a game of it. And
They played the
I
Bears.
mean, yeah. Well, I'm even thinking back to and that was, I suppose, that was a different season almost. It was like week 7 or something. When I'm looking at it here, I was the start of November it was. But I'm kind of just thinking about the Kansas City game when they probably looked one of their worst against a good team, New Orleans. And I suppose that's why we're giving questions and marks to New Orleans' offense and stuff like that. Even though it was a 3-point game, it was 3-point games aren't all created equal, you know.
Right.
And they look bad, New Orleans, and that one. But again, that's the test that we're going to see going forward. I just don't expect the Chicago Bears to be able to keep pace with one of the forerunners or running from the forefront, New Orleans all year. The Chicago just haven't been at the races, and yeah, look, I'm not giving them too much of a chance. There's only so many ways you can say it.
Yeah, and then of course, this game is going to take on extra significance because it's been reported throughout the week that this could potentially be Drew Brees' last season. And you have to think back that this man's 40 years old and he literally shattered his entire rib cage about a month and a half ago. So this is kind of like a last hurrah kind of thing. This could realistically be Drew Brees' last game if they lose it. So it takes on an extra significance in that it's going to be extra special. And that team is going to come out inspired and fired up because they also know what's at stake, that it's all on the line for the rest of this go as long as they're in the dance. I'm taking the Saints to win this one. Like I said when I told you a couple of minutes ago, Mark, I tried so hard to find a way for the Bears to win this. I just can't see it. I just can't.
It's funny that you say that they're going to come out fired up for Drew Brees. Now we're saving that for next week, Hayden. There's coming out from next week on. They're going to be fired up. This is just getting through the Bears for now. That's our promo for a week's time. Come back for that. Now I guess another important game then in the NFC from the number 2 to number 7 is the number 4 to number 5 seed, the Rams playing Seattle. Mm-hmm. And this to me is certainly an intriguing game. I think our picks might be kind of split on this one. I see Seattle as having had 2 halves to their regular season, really. I mean, they split the game 6-2 either side, but the first half was dominated by their offense, and the story of the second half was certainly their defense. And it's not bad now when you're going against this hit or miss Rams team to have your defense playing well, i.e. the pass rush is able to get a sack now, and definitely the health of Jamal Adams helps you. But it's the Rams defense that I'm worried about in terms of Seattle. I mean, we've mentioned on previous shows, and just because I'm aware that we have new listeners, about how Russell Wilson flamed out of that MVP race, and how it kind of went hand in hand with the offense being figured out, for lack of a better word. They went from the first half of the season, they were averaging 34 points a game, and that dropped down to just shy of 23 points a game. The deep ball was removed. Wilson went from 15 deep ball completions, that's more than 20 yards, to just 7. And then when you look at his main man, DK Metcalf, who was the darling of the first half of the season, he went from having close to 100 yards a game, it dropped down to 64.5 yards a game the second half of the season. And a third of those yards, 177, came against Philadelphia. Now, obviously playing in the NFC West, the Seattle Seahawks have met the Rams twice this season, and both those games happened in the second half. So it's not too far removed from these two teams having played. They split the series. The Rams won the first game. The Seahawks won the second game. I mean, again, it just shows the hit or missness of LA, and you don't know what version of them is going to come out. But one telling thing on the defense was Jalen Ramsey only gave DK Metcalf 11 yards in their 2 meetings when they matched up 1-on-1. So it'll be interesting to see what the defense does with Jalen Ramsey and whether they just make him go with DK Metcalf each. I suppose just make a man mark him for the whole game. So that LA Rams defense is just looking so ferocious right now that I'm worried about Seattle's offense. It just hasn't come out the second half of the season. Like I just said, the points are down, the yards per game are way down, and that LA Rams defense, it's getting better and better as the weeks go on.
I can't believe I'm going to say this as much as I fawned over the Steelers defense this entire season, but I think the Rams defense excites me more at this point. I truly love watching them play. And like Mark mentioned, when he talked about the Seahawks had a tale of 2 seasons and how the first half was vastly different from the second half. While the Rams wasn't as jarring as that, the last month of their season has not exactly gone swell, to say. Like, let's go back to that first meeting between the two in November, the Seahawks and the Rams. It was in LA, and the Rams defense came out and played phenomenal. They got 6 sacks on Russell Wilson. They got a couple turnovers, and everything was awesome. And then they played again the day after Christmas, not the day after Christmas. It was 2 days after Christmas, my bad, in Seattle. And that was the game that Jared Goff jacked up his thumb. And everything has just been very much downhill for the Rams since then. In fact, it's been downhill since that Jets lost. Everything has just been coming up not good since then. So you fast forward to now, this game is in Seattle, and it's a massive thing of intrigue for the entire Rams offense because we genuinely don't know what's going to come out and what it's going to look like. Because Sean McVay talked about it on Tuesday. He said that I'm not going to tip my hand, and I'm paraphrasing here, of course. He said he's not going to tell us who's going to be a starting quarterback until game time, basically is what he said. So we won't know until about 90 minutes before kickoff for sure if Jared Goff is going to be able to go or not. We have to remember that last Monday, he had surgery to repair the thumb on his throwing hand. So you have to imagine the amount of pain he is in just to grip a football. Not just throw it, grip a football. And I watched a report, I think it was Ruiz, one of the reporters for the NFL Network. He was in Seattle and he was talking about it, and he said that weather could be a factor in this game, not just the cold weather, but there is a chance of rain in the forecast, that throughout the day, this game is like a 4:40 Eastern time kickoff. So it's, late afternoon kickoff. That during the day, it's about a 20% chance. That doubles to about 40 as the night goes on. So if it starts raining, it becomes harder to grip the football. So you got a man with a surgically repaired thumb who is having trouble gripping the football in the rain is not a good combo. So if Goff can't go, that means John Warford, the guy who played last week, would have to go as well. And McVay even hinted at he could have 2 quarterbacks out there running his offense. I know he's not going to do that for sure, but he's just trying to, throw stuff out there and see what sticks. It's just a lot of questions right now around this Rams team. And when you have this much question about the what's going on with your offense, we talked about this last week when it came to the Cardinals and the Rams matchup, Mark. We said, what needs to happen? Coaches need to come through for the team. Well, in this case, coaching doesn't need to just come through for the Rams. The defense arguably needs to have the best game of their season. They have to come in and shut Russell Wilson down. They not only have to sack him a bunch and get turnovers, they're probably going to have to score some on defense. That's the only way I can see the Rams winning this game, because their offense is just so unknown right now. And that they're going to get a boost with Andrew Whitworth, one of their offensive linemen, coming back. He got cleared from IR today. After he tore his MCL and PCL in week 10 of the season. So that's a nice little boost, hopefully to help their running game out. But it's really hard to put faith in this Rams team right now when you don't know what's going on at their quarterback position.
I would have no doubt that Jared Goff plays in this game based on he was throwing before the Cardinals game on Sunday, 5 days removed from having the surgery, or 6 days. So I think that it is mind games from Sean McVay, and why not? I mean, you're able to now say that we could have 2 quarterbacks. So all of a sudden, Seattle has to do due diligence on their 3rd string quarterback. Now, Wolford the other day playing the Cardinals, like, he got intercepted on his first play, and then he grew into the game after that. And I was tweeting some guy, he was just trying to bang that Colin Kaepernick drum, saying, oh, why isn't Colin Kaepernick a backup quarterback? And I was like, what are you talking about, John? He's absolutely shredding the Cardinals right now. And like, even if shredding is too much of a word, even though he had a great connection with Robert Woods, the wide receiver, that I wouldn't fear too much if he has to go in. Now, it's obviously not great, but it's certainly better than had he stunk in the game against the Cardinals the other day, and they only get through because the Cardinals were so bad and the defense did score points, which you're after saying there is important. I mean, the NFC had the most interceptions thrown by its quarterbacks out of any division in the NFL this year. I mean, both teams are liable to do it, including Russell Wilson, especially if they're getting flashy. But when you say there about, like, can you trust them? I mean, that was the calling card for Miami for the last half of the season. As soon as Tua went in, it was the defense that kept them competitive, and it was the defense that kept them in the playoff race. So I definitely think that the Rams defense is a step above again. And yeah, I mean, Brandon Staley looking after it, isn't it? Like, 38 years old, he could be a head coach soon enough. He looks like the next Robert Sala in terms of the names and the defensive side of the ball. That, yeah, I mean, I'll put my cards on the table now. I'm picking the Rams for this game. I just think that their defense is playing so well. And I mean, I'm calling an upset essentially in this game, and that's why I meant at the top of the show, I'm going to call one that I feel like isn't natural. I had Seattle written in my notes, but when I was thinking about it, I just thought the defense is that good, and you're hoping that the offense clicks this week. But I haven't gotten a status about Cooper Kupp. I presume he's back. He was on the COVID list last week. The likes of then Cam Akers and stuff is getting healthy again. He was questionable against the Cardinals, ended up playing. He was great. So yeah, it seems that they're trending up still, the Rams. And I don't know how deep of a run they could make, but something tells me this week I'm going with them.
Listen, like we said a couple minutes ago, this Rams defense absolutely shut down the Seahawks in November, and it was the reason why they won that game. So it is definitely not out of the realm of possibility that they could do that exact thing again and win in Seattle. But, it's just hard. I really want to take the Rams to win in this one. I want to join you, Mark, but I just can't. I'm going to take Seattle.
I feel like DK Metcalf is going to be a serious playoff player. It's going to be one of those like legendary, like Larry Fitzgerald or an Antonio Brown that just performs really, really well in the playoffs. I don't know why. It's just would be typical that he would be within the division as a player that I kind of not had written off going into the draft, but I didn't mind. Well, I wanted him when the Cardinals selected Andy Isabella in the second round, but yeah, imagine that. That's the last thing Cardinals or Rams or 49ers fans need.
Right. It should be an interesting one. I know NFC West matchups usually are, but yeah, a lot of intrigue, a lot of mystify of what's going to happen with the Rams. I think Goff will play like Mark said, but it'll be interesting to see what it looks like, how it's going to take shape.
It's excellent to see such fantastic number 4 versus number 5 seed games.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, these are all.
This must be a 3 versus. Now this is a 3 versus 6, I suppose. No, I'm wrong there.
It could easily be a 4 and 5 though. Like this is the kind of matchup 4 and 5 usually is. To be honest.
Yeah. Well, are we going to our number 4 and 5 this year?
Let's move on to our 4 and 5 that doesn't fit that bill at all, because the 5th seed in the NFC, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, are going on the road to take on the 4th seeded NFC East champion Washington football team. And we're finally here, people. The nightmare is finally over. The NFC East spat out a champion, and now we all have to watch them in a primetime game in a playoff moment. We all finally are almost done with this nightmare, and we should be excited because Washington represents a unique challenge for Tampa Bay, and here's why. Because the big storyline for Tampa Bay this entire week has been, the health of Mike Evans. Is he going to play? If you missed their game this past Sunday, he hyperextended his knee in the end zone. Thankfully, it's just a hyperextended knee because, honest to God, when I watched the injury happen live, I thought he tore his ACL. I said, oh, my God, this is awful. But thankfully, it's just hyperextended, and he's listed as day-to-day, and he has potential to play in this game. They're not quite sure yet. But even if he doesn't, I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to be perfectly fine because Antonio Brown's been on a run as of late, and we haven't really talked about it much on this show, but he's caught 4 reception touchdowns in the last 3 games for the Buccaneers. He's been on fire lately. And that should really scare people that even when arguably they're missing their best weapon in Mike Evans, that offense really hasn't missed a beat. They're still playing just fine. They're still putting up numbers just fine. And that bodes well for Tampa Bay, that even if Mike Evans plays, and he probably won't be close to 100% if he is on a pitch count, for example, they'll be aces okay. So the major storyline is Mike Evans, and you can push that aside and say, okay, the Bucs look in great shape. They should come in here and roll this team. Here's where I'm going to say pump the brakes and say we need to watch this with some caution. Mark, yes or no? In your opinion, do you consider this a primetime game?
Don't get me started. You know how I feel about that. I was absolutely shocked. It went back to something that I said last week about when they put the Washington Philadelphia game on the primetime slot. They said, oh, because it's the NFC East team and it's the biggest market, and Tampa Bay, because they were expecting Tampa Bay fans to watch this, and I was like, that's the reason. They're purely doing it because it's a money thing. Because I look forward to obviously watching the games, but I wouldn't have minded if this was a 6 o'clock my time game, so that I can kind of tune in at the tail end of it watch the 9 p.m. game, and I enjoy staying up for the 1 a.m. on a Saturday game. Like, we don't get to do it that often. I love wildcard weekend. It's just pure football, football, football. And it's like, now I'm going to have to tune in, and there's going to be like this huge lull for the just pure excitement for the early games, and then we're going to get primetime matchup of Tampa Bay playing Washington. Now, I haven't even given my take on Washington, but you asked me the question, is it primetime? I gave a very long-winded no.
I just like how I was just trying to prove a point about Tampa Bay and primetime games this year. Mark's digging up his rant about primetime games. So,
sorry, I missed the point. I actually was watching Bruce Arians' press conference, and I saw that he was asked about, is there a curse over this team in the primetime games? It's just something that we talked about in the podcast a few weeks ago, and we said, they don't want to be doing it. So you can come in on this again if that's your point.
Yeah, so over the course of the season, by my count, they've been in 4 primetime games throughout the course of the year. They're 1-3. And in all brutal honesty, Mark, they could be 0-4. You look at the games they played, and it was an embarrassing loss to the Bears early on Thursday Night Football. Then they got blown out by the Saints on Sunday Night Football. And then the Rams game on Monday Night Football a couple of weeks ago, at least it was a bit closer and they looked competitive, but they lost that one as well. And then their one win on primetime was a Monday night win over the Giants, a very game Giants team that could have easily won that game. So they've struggled in primetime throughout this entire season. And that's why I asked Mark that, is that, do you think this is a primetime game? Because they have not shown up well in these primetime games. And then here comes a Washington football team that has the one thing that Tom Brady has struggled with his entire career, is pressure from the defensive line. I mean, that was the one thing they screamed over and over in New England. And that's the one way you beat Tom Brady. So Tampa Bay hasn't done well. Oh, and also Tom Brady has a losing career record against the big bad Alex Smith. So you also factor that into the equation, that he's 1-2 all time versus Alex Smith. He's scared of him,
I'm not going to factor in a 1-2, a slight margin on a small scale.
I'm kidding, of course. I'm kidding. But I'm just throwing these numbers out there because I feel like this is going to be a very odd game, and that a lot of people I've seen in the media this week are just really writing this one off quickly. And I really want to tell people, just wait and watch it happen. I'm not saying Washington's going to come out and pull a surprise upset. I just say it's going to be closer and a lot more difficult than people think, that Tampa's just going to come in and roll them.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I suppose my excitement or lack thereof of excitement for this game kind of was coming from a different point, in that it was just going to be an absolute blowout. I think that the way I look at it, it's the most unlikely game to be a shootout, and you'd imagine that that's what they want. But there's a number of reasons why it won't be a shootout, other than, I suppose, like you're pointing out, that the Bucks haven't been able to score on prime time, it seems. Mm-hmm. But they're coming in to this game having scored 37 points a game, and their last 4 games they've been rolling on. And yeah, obviously that points all kind of thing. So it can't be a shootout, because on the other side of the ball, Washington is, their offense isn't quite like that, you'd imagine. Bruce Arians was praising how they're 5-1 Washington is under Alex Smith. Mm-hmm. But I mean, who's that been against? Yeah, they beat Pittsburgh, but then they've beaten Dallas, Cincinnati, Philadelphia, all teams with top 10 draft picks. So I mean, not that I put too much stock into that, but the whole thing that this game's going to boil down to is the defense containing Tom Brady.
Yep. And
specifically, it comes down to the defensive line, really. So in week 13, Hayden, that Washington goes out, beats Pittsburgh, hands them the first loss, and you're coming away saying they saw something on film that nobody else saw. Washington did, and it kind of pointed to, this defense knows something, it's talented. Week 15 comes, and I'm reading a report that an NFL executive, according to ESPN, was after coming out and saying that Washington's defensive line is the new San Francisco 49ers, and no team wants them making it to the playoffs out of the NFC East, because they're the most fearful team out of everyone there. Mm-hmm. Then you get into week 17 last week, and Chase Young is coming out talking about how he wants the GOAT, Tom Brady, and Ron Rivera said that made him cringe, and it was bulletin board material for Tampa Bay that they're going to put that up now and say, the young rook wants to get after our quarterback. But all of those kind of weeks, those scenarios point to a team that's playing with confidence. I mean, in the Pittsburgh game, Montez Sweat and Chase Young, the most probably vital pieces to the offensive line for Washington right now, didn't actually get a sack in the Pittsburgh game, but it was just the pressure from either side that they forced the ball to come out. And that was a huge that was a huge play or a huge thing that they were trying to do for Washington, was force the ball to come out. So you don't have to watch to see is Brady getting sacked. I mean, he's only been sacked, or only 3 quarterbacks have been sacked more times than him this year out of the starters. I have the names there: Rodgers, Rivers, and Breeze are the only guys that have gotten sacked fewer times than Tom Brady. So it's not about them getting sacked; it's about them getting pressure. Young in particular, Chase Young in particular, he was the one that stepped up when the whole Dwayne Haskins thing kind of started happening and the team started to need a young voice. And he was the one that stepped up, and he's even a captain in his first year, which, is impressive. And I just think that, that comment that he made then in week 17 is really positive, because it shows the confidence and the swagger that the team is going in, that they're not fearful of this, what was the scariest defense or offense coming into the year. That I do think it's positive from a Washington point of view that the defense is playing so well and gives them a chance. I mean, they're middle of the pack in terms of actual blitzing, but they're a most efficient team when they do blitz. So Washington's defense certainly gives them a chance, and it's something that we said to begin the season for Washington was, let's watch this defensive line. But I think it might be fitting that it's the reason that we go out on with Washington this week, because I presume that they're going to lose this one. That if Tampa Bay lays an egg, I mean, geez, does Tom Brady even come back next year? Like what's there to go for? Because it's all in front of them now. They have the Super Bowl being hosted in their stadium in whatever it is, 3 weeks time, that you can't get tripped up by a Washington team. And it would be scary in terms of a Bruce Arians team, because I mean, that's been a pitfall for him in the past. Is, we talked about it 2 weeks ago on the show about what's his kind of crutch or whatever, is Achilles heel, I should say, for Bruce Arians. And that's one thing, that when they're supposed to absolutely bully a team, that sometimes they fall short of that.
That's interesting, because this Washington team, like I said a couple minutes ago, like that's how Brady was beat a lot in New England was, when Denver went on their Super Bowl run and they beat Tom Brady in the playoffs. How did they beat him? Really good defensive line play. How did the Giants beat him twice in the Super Bowl? Really good defensive line play. And like Mark articulated here, what does the Washington football team have? Pretty good defensive line play. All that being said, it sounds like we're really making the case for Washington to pull the upset, but I'm still taking Tampa Bay, and that's really due because, like the argument I made about the Rams game, Washington is having issues at quarterback as well. I know Mark has probably heard this as well about Alex Smith. He hasn't been taking reps at practice. It's been Taylor Heineke. I assume Alex Smith is going to play in this game, but right now it's starting to look like it may not be a foregone conclusion like we had assumed it would. So another team having some injury issues at quarterback, it does not bode well when they absolutely need everything rocking on every single cylinder. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. It is obviously an issue. I think that he will play. He was limited last week as well, and he was able to play in the game. But obviously not a good sign, especially against Tampa Bay's offense or defense, which I know like Todd Bowles is getting looks again for head coaching jobs. His interviews this week for that. So it just goes to show again how good his defense is. I think that he'd be out of his depth going to be a head coach again. I just thought that the New York wasn't the best resume. I think we might talk about that later on in the show, though, so I'll leave that until then.
All right, so I'm taking Tampa Bay. I'm assuming you are as well?
Yeah, I'm going for Tampa Bay. And again, if anyone wants to see the guest pickers picks, they'll be up on social media on Instagram and Twitter.
So let's move on to our next game, Mark, because we still have 2 more games in the AFC. The 8th-seeded Indianapolis Colts going to Buffalo to take on the 2nd-seeded Bills. And I think this could actually be a lot closer than some people are saying for a playoff game.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. I'd like to hear what you think is going to happen. So for me, to start it off, I think that, you have to point to Buffalo's explosive offense, that they can do no wrong, it seems lately. I went back to look at kind of what happened, what's changed. I mean, last year we know that all that they seemed to do in Buffalo was run the ball, that they didn't have an efficient passing game, and then they went out and got Stephon Diggs and all that changed. So much so that Josh Allen has passed 125 more times this year. That's almost half as many that he had in total last year. He's up to 350 odd or something passes this year.
Mhm.
So he's way up in passing, but what's more impressive is that he's way up in his completion percentage. He's gone from 59% to 69%. I mean, that's a pretty elite level when you're touching that 70% mark in terms of your passing. And I've made the comment a couple of times this year that I felt like Buffalo was one elite cornerback away from, shutting down Diggs and shutting down the whole offense. But that, I mean, nothing points to that being a correct take yet, because I mean, Stephon Diggs, John Brown, and Cole Beasley consistently win their one-on-one matchups. They're the best team against man coverage statistically, and when the play breaks down, the O-line probably doesn't get the credit that it deserves. I mean, they're keeping Josh Allen really clean, and he's just a nightmare. Teams are struggling when Josh Allen breaks down and play and starts to scramble, because we know that he was a runner from last year. But then if he's able to add in the passing game as well this year, I mean, broken plays, yeah, give them to Buffalo. They'll take them all day long. And then on the defensive side of the ball, it's really important, because we've said all year that, I mean, going against that Colts offensive line, like, it's a nightmare. But if you're able to get pressure, that's important. So their defense blitzes the seventh most, and kind of in a weird way, none of their players show up in kind of the sack leaders this year. No player on the Bills defense is more than 5 sacks, but they are the second most efficient win rate percentage, which I mean, if they're able to do it this week against that fantastic Colts O-line, obviously it'd be fantastic. But then it's the ball hawking secondary really puts pressure then on on Phillip Rivers, Tre'Davious White, Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer. I mean, like, if they're able to shut down the back end and give the Bills defensive line a bit of a chance, and they can make this, what we've said all year going into the season, and now as it starts to wind down, we've been saying the way to beat that Colts offense is make them one-dimensional. And if all of a sudden they're forced to run the ball because Phillip Rivers just has no options, or like he has no time to pass the ball, I think it could be an absolute nightmare.
Oh, this is very interesting, because I was coming in with almost a similar take, but a little bit different one about the Colts. So let me start from the very beginning of my argument here. So the Bills put up 50 points last week in a blowout over the Dolphins, eliminated from the Dolphins from postseason contention. But that loss by the Dolphins meant that the Colts then get into the postseason. So now the Colts get to thank the Bills personally for helping them get into the playoffs. That's very nice for them. But you look at how these two teams match up, and you look at what the Colts have done the last couple of weeks, especially this past week in their game against Jacksonville. They had Jonathan Taylor explode for over 200 rushing yards and a couple touchdowns. He's played a lot, like really, really, really better than he did for the vast majority of the season. And he's kind of on this surge. He passed over 1,000 yards this past Sunday. And I think that's exactly how the Colts do this. They have to kind of run the football a bunch and force it down the Bills' throats. Now, the Bills aren't exactly a bad run defense. I'm not going to come on here and say that. They aren't good at it either. They're middle of the pack. They're right around average in terms of run defense. So in my opinion, the Colts have to control time of possession and keep the ball out of Josh Allen's hands. They basically have to play keep away. It's the Mahomes strategy is what I'm arguing here. How you try to limit their scoring opportunities as much as possible to give yourself a chance. What is an absolutely no-go situation, what the Colts cannot allow to happen under a single circumstance, under anything, they cannot have this go into a shootout. They do not have the weaponry. They do not have the firepower. Phillip Rivers is still dealing with that jacked up foot that we talked about a couple weeks ago, Mark, that he is probably going to need surgery at the end of the season to help fix. If this goes into some kind of 40 to 35 shootout, the Colts are not winning that thing. They ain't going to come close to it. They cannot go shot for shot with this Bills offense. It's just too good for any team, in my opinion, outside of the Chiefs to really try to go that route with. So they have to run the football. They got to control time of possession. They got to keep Josh Allen off the field. And it really comes down to the Colts defense playing a pretty perfect game. Now, I lost a lot of confidence in this team after that debacle with the Steelers a couple weeks ago, where they blew that big double-digit lead and they didn't look good in the second half. And all my confidence in the Colts just vanished. Conversely, my confidence in the Bills has been going up every single week for like the past 10 weeks. I'm in love with this team. I love what they're doing. I mean, my God, they were dancing at practice the other day to music. I mean, they're so loose. They're relaxed. They're enjoying what's happening right now. They're in the zone, and they're one of the top teams to be feared in the entire NFL right now. And I think the Colts have a pretty good shot at hanging in there and pulling the upset, but they have to do it a very specific way. They can't go shot for shot with them. I'm taking the Bills to win this one, though.
It's one thing that I'd written in my notes was don't let Indy's defense beat them in terms of Buffalo. Last year, what happened in the playoffs, but Josh Allen threw the 4 interceptions again against Houston. They were completely in his head. And for an Indianapolis team that I suppose just does a lot right, they don't stand out in any particular category. They just do a lot right. You can't let them get into this game. So they just have to return Buffalo with that fantastic offense. I'm going for Buffalo as well, but it's definitely an interesting game. I think this one, just one on paper that should be a lot of fun. I think I'd almost be rooting for the Colts just to make a game of it, but I think the Buffalo could really be a trip too hard for Indianapolis. Who knows whether it'll be Phillip Rivers' last game in the league as well.
He hinted as much this past week that he said this could potentially be my last game. So, a lot riding in these wild card games for these older quarterbacks like Drew Brees and Phillip Rivers. But that's the Buffalo and Indianapolis game. We got one more game to get to here on our wild card preview, Mark. And that's the, if you don't mind moving on, it's the 7th seeded Cleveland Browns going to the 3rd seeded Pittsburgh Steelers, an AFC North rematch. And I'm gonna be brutally honest with you guys. When I sat down to write these notes and I was preparing to come on and talk about this game, I fully wanted to come on here and take the Browns. I had it written down in my notes. I wanted to come on here and take them. And then the news came out this week that they're still dealing with the COVID outbreak, and Kevin Stefanski won't be available for this game. Their head coach, a couple other assistant coaches won't be available. One of their starting guards will not be available for this game because of COVID. And it felt like all of the air, all of the positive feelings I had about the Browns just got sucked out of the room. And I said, why are we even playing this game at this point? We can't expect to seriously take this game seriously if one of the guys who is the leader of this team, guided this team out of the darkness and is a legit coach of the year contender and is the only reason that they are here in the playoffs at all, is not going to be a part of this team in this game. Why are we playing it? Like, I understand that the NFL really has a tight deadline they need to get this game out on, but still, like, we can't take this game seriously. We can't sit here and praise the Steelers when they come out and win this game, which they're probably gonna do because they beat a team that didn't have a head coach. But, like, we can't take that seriously. We saw this happen earlier in the season when the Lions, coaching staff went without a head coach for a Saturday game against the Buccaneers, and you know what happened? The Buccaneers exploded for 40-plus points on the poor Lions. Now, they were going to win that game anyway. I'm not saying that the scale suddenly tipped without a head coach, but history has shown us it doesn't go well for a team that doesn't have their guy out there. So for a season that held so much promise for the Browns, I literally have the NFL Network on my TV right now, and they're replaying the Browns and Ravens Monday Night Football Classic from a couple weeks ago. And all of that good feeling that has been building around the Browns since then just got sucked out of the room and is completely gone. This season of such good feeling is just going to end on such a flat note this weekend. It just sucks. Like, this is the only team this could have happened to, Mark. Literally the only team in the NFL that could have a breakout season for the first time in nearly 20 years and make the postseason, and now their head coach won't be on the sideline. It's ridiculous. It's sad. It really is. My heart breaks for Cleveland fans. It really does.
You know what, mine doesn't. I think that it's too harsh to say that all hope goes on Kevin Stefanski. I mean, it's definitely a blow, but like, sure, teams have their seasons written off because their quarterback goes down injured, or there's been week 17 quarterback injuries that have written off playoff teams before. It's like, you've made the playoffs. Like, you should be, obviously, you're not just content with making the playoffs. You want to make a push, but I'm just not too sympathetic. They've made it there. They're going to have to get over it. There's enough coaches behind the scenes that'll be able to get it done. I mean, you've played 17 weeks, or you've been together 17 weeks. Everyone else knows how the offense goes as well. I didn't know why they couldn't have them phone in, honestly, to make play calls and stuff like that. But maybe they're going to have something like that worked out anyway. But like, there's enough talent supposedly in Cleveland that if you're good, you're going to have to go and beat them. Like, it shouldn't all come down to, is your head coach there or not? It's absolutely a blow. I get that. But like, the whole NFL is based on adversity and how you can get through it. So sorry, Browns fans, but you're just going to have to get through this one as well, I think. I mean, maybe that's too harsh. If it was my team, I'd be absolutely devastated. I would feel like, the world is against us. But you just have to go out and win it. And I mean, like, it brings you back to when the Cardinals played in 2013 against Carolina. They got into the playoffs and they're on their third string quarterback, Ryan Lindley, at the time, and the guy could hardly throw the ball. And it's like, I remember it was a sick feeling of like, they deserved to do better, and they whatever, they were a 10-6 team going into the playoffs, but they lost both their first and second. And it's just, that's the kind of crap that happens to you in the playoffs, and you're going to have to get through it. I mean, I don't think that's going to be the only reason that they could lose. Now, Pittsburgh was a 3-point favorite anyway before the Stefanski news. I have them written down in my notes as 5.5. I read it somewhere else that maybe in America, bookies, or in Vegas or whatever, it could be as far as 6.5 points now in Pittsburgh's favor. So I suppose that's a sizable chunk based on the Stefanski news. But to me, I felt like Pittsburgh was turning the page anyway after their lull since that week 11 game against, or week 13 game against Washington. I thought, like you pointed out in the last preview about when they played Indianapolis, that halfway through that game, something clicked, that Tony Romo had been calling for a deep ball. He was kind of saying, yeah, get the intermediate and deep balls going, because that'll, when Indianapolis has to drop its players back, that'll open up the short throws again. And that's what they were doing and have been doing for the last week or so, even when Mason Rudolph came in against Cleveland last week, that they have those short, quick hitting passes back. And that's kind of how they want to operate in Pittsburgh. And it's all like, yeah, when Washington said we saw something on paper, that was those short balls, and let's get aggressive and, like, remove them. So now they've fixed that. They've put it on paper. Okay, so if you defend the short game, we're going to go for those long balls, because the likes of Chase Claypool can beat you. Like, he's fantastic hands. Even though I think part of it is they're worrying about drops. The likes of Eric Ebron and stuff was just dropping the ball like crazy. That's why short passes sometimes help. But yeah, they did it last week again against Cleveland, did Pittsburgh. So I think that, yeah, that's one part of it, that the offensive working. But the huge advantage is they just played Cleveland last week with a weakened team and kept them to 24 points. Baker Mayfield was sacked 4 times with TJ Watt and Cameron Hayward not even in the game. So with TJ Watt coming back in, that's got to be scary, because they already know the weaknesses of Cleveland, who had to have that game. So put everything on paper for Pittsburgh, whereas Pittsburgh was able to keep at least something, even if it's in the form of Cameron Hayward and TJ Watt being rested. That's kind of scary, I think. And then I read this fun little nugget about TJ Watt. He's been going up to referees this year, all year. He's been going up to referees before games saying, I'm going to line up as tight to the line of scrimmage as I possibly can. So don't flag me for it. I'm doing it on purpose, but I'm not going to go offside. But it'll be fitting, I think, if that's what this game comes down to, whether TJ Watt wrecks it, because the Browns O-line was so bad for so long, and they're trying to fix it for so long, that it's finally been good this year. And they're certainly, against this defense, going to have a day if they're going to keep those guys from getting to Baker Mayfield and making it impossible for him to throw the ball.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough outing. Like we mentioned months ago, when the Browns went to Pittsburgh to play there, I brought up the stat that the Browns hadn't won there in a decade plus. They don't go to Pittsburgh and have a good time. They are on a massive losing streak there. And I really thought this would be the time to turn that around. They had all this momentum at their backs. They had a chance to really do something. And I feel like that air is let out of the balloon. Mark says there's still a shot. Like Mark said, there's still a lot of talent on that team. It's not like Baker Mayfield just suddenly vanished. They're still completely loaded on offense. Screw it. Put me down for the Browns. I'll ride them this week.
Oh, wow.
Screw
I'm
it.
still going for Pittsburgh. Don't get me wrong. No, I mean, I'm going for Pittsburgh. I just glancing at our other picks. Yeah, I think this to me was the toughest game to call with Stefanski in or out. I just thought that on paper it was, yeah, they're right to put this as the Sunday night game. I mean, it's going to make Monday for me suck, because I'm like, I wouldn't have stayed up for the Saturday game had that been the Sunday. I wouldn't have stayed up for the Bucks Washington game if that had been the Sunday game. But this one, I think we have to stay up for. I hope that it goes well for Cleveland. On the other side, I hope that it goes well for Pittsburgh, from the point of view that Roethlisberger, they're saying it's his last chance, perhaps, to get a third ring for him, because he's 38. So I don't say that you have to write him off. And, he slimmed down and stuff this year, and, like it seemed to help him out. We'll see what he says after the season, whether he felt like that was the reason he stayed healthy or not. But it's more to do with, they're going to get hit now with free agency and the cap next year. So they're going to be more reliant on the likes of Chase Claypool. Obviously, they're lucky now that they have him going forward, and that would be a bit cheaper that they have such a cheap wide receiver. But that could start to impact Pittsburgh, and that bit of that competitiveness that has been there for the last few years. It might take a bit of a dip for a couple of years. And that's pure speculation. We'll get into that in the off season. But how you're saying there's certain quarterbacks, Phillip Rivers and stuff, that look, it's worth mentioning this as we come out of these games. What a who's who of quarterbacks we have in the playoffs this year. And it's kind of on the same point that I'm saying. Normally some teams go into these hobbled and injured and banged up, but there's relative health there this year, I think, with the teams. And I know, like, we're slagging now that Mitchell Trubisky is going to be in, but like, you've Phillip Rivers, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger, the young guys, Baker Mayfield, Mahomes, Jackson, Allen, Alex Smith, former first overall pick and stuff in there. That it's a nice kind of collection. Guys that have been there before. I know not Baker Mayfield, but I think it's a nice group. By and large. Now, yeah, your lawyer obviously is your Mitchell Trubisky, but I do think it's fun that you see those. Sort of 10 years ago, your Brady's, Breeze, Rivers, all them would have been there as well. So it's kind of cool.
That's a nice little collection of guys so far. And like Mark said, this could be the last hurrah for a couple of them. So it's extra important this postseason. But that, people, is our full wild card weekend preview. And it was a lot of fun to talk these games. They should be a lot of fun, but don't go anywhere, people, because we aren't quite done just yet. Mark, if you don't mind sticking around for a couple more minutes.
Bonus coverage.
Yeah, bonus coverage. Because we want to talk about the coaching carousel around the league. Because as of right now, as of this recording, it's going to stick this way. I don't know why I phrased it that way. There are 6 coaching openings around the league, and that's about average at this point of the year. And we thought it would be a very fun exercise if we power rank these coaching openings and what we liked and what we disliked about them. So I have created a list, and I'm going to read this list to you all and tell you which coaching jobs I really like and which ones I really don't. And Mark is here to tell me why I'm completely wrong on each one of my picks.
Are you going to give us a why as to why you're ranking them the way you are?
Yes, I wrote a little blurb about a paragraph long each team I ranked and why I put them.
Oh, lovely. That doesn't match up with mine. I've written a couple of notes like you have.
All right, so we're going to go from worst to best out of the 6. So starting off at number 6 on our rankings, I have the Detroit Lions. And the reason why I put the Lions here is because a lot is unknown about what the state of that team is. They have all their draft picks coming up, so that's a very good thing. But their cap space isn't exactly ideal. And the new owner and general manager, not the new owner, the new general manager and head coach combo that needs to come in for the team, they're going to have a pretty big decision that they need to make, as reported by, I believe it was Rap Sheet this past week, that the new head coach and general manager are going to be the ones that decide if Matthew Stafford is going to be a Lion going forward. And that's been one of the big questions ever since Matt Patricia got fired, was that, is Matthew Stafford going to stay on for another rebuild? Because that's what's going to need to happen for this team, is a full-scale rebuild. Getting out of what they were running under Patricia and Bob Quinn was a remodel of what the Patriots were doing, and it didn't quite work out. So a lot of the players on these rosters, especially on defense, are probably not going to be on the team going forward. And the big question is, will Matthew be on the team? And with that much uncertainty at literally every turn around the team, I put them at last place. It was a very close fight between them and the number 5 team that I'll get to here in a couple minutes, but yeah, the Lions are in last place on my coaching openings.
Do I give my feedback now?
Yeah,
later?
Go for it. Shoot.
No, for those exact reasons, I think you're spot on. I just thought Matt Stafford, is he going to be there or not?
Mm-hmm.
I think it kind of will depend on the draft though as well, like who's going to be around for them. And then, just a very average roster. So
yeah, literally the definition of average. So Lions are number 6, but it was a very close fight, in my opinion, for the bottom 2 spots, because coming in at number 5, it was close. I almost put this team in last place. It's the Houston Texans. And the only reason that I put them at 5 ahead of the Lions is because they have one thing that the Lions don't have. It's hope. And you're wondering, like, what the heck does hope mean? Hope is Deshaun Watson. And that is, as long as you have him on your team, you have a chance to potentially do something good. And he had a really great season this year, despite their record. And that's what I really want to point to, is that he had no help and he played a great season, and they still ended up where they are now with what should be the 3rd overall pick, but that belongs to the Dolphins because of a trade in the past. As long as they have Watson, you would think they had hope, but according to Pro Football Talk, a report that came out on Tuesday, that Deshaun Watson had apparently broached some of his teammates about a potential trade, and the internet literally exploded. Now, Pro Football Talk prefaced it by saying, it could be Deshaun Watson as a smokescreen, trying to make sure the organization is listening to what he wants in a head coach kind of thing, that he doesn't really want to trade. He's kind of trying to play mind games or something like that. Who really knows? But if Watson isn't in the team's future, then this team is literally going nowhere. This team has no cap space. They have no draft picks. They don't have a first rounder this year or a second rounder. They don't get to make their first pick in the draft till the 3rd round. So reinforcements are not coming for this Houston Texans team. And after their game on Sunday, J.J. Watt walked up to Deshaun Watson and was caught on an on-field mic. I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically apologized to Deshaun Watson for wasting such a great year. And I feel like next year for the Texans as well is going to be another wasted opportunity. And the head coach who's coming in has to kind of deal with that they're not going to be able to really suit this team up in the offseason to go out and compete again. They're going to have to take their lumps again. And then maybe in 2022 be a competitive team. And that's why I put the Texans here at 5.
The Texans for me, and I'll spoil my own list, are without a shadow of a doubt the worst head coaching position as far as I'm concerned. I had them put in that spot the day they traded DeAndre Hopkins to my Cardinals for absolutely nothing. And it was like, I knew that the move had happened because they had no cap space to re-sign DeAndre Hopkins. But then when they don't have the first and second, sure, you can do absolutely nothing as well, the GM and a head coach, if you can't have your first and second round pick. There's no, you can't put your mark on a team. And their caps, so their cap space is horrendous. And then the draft. And then, when I saw the report about Deshaun Watson, I said, game over. No, that's horrendous, because now you're looking for what? You're going to have to, you don't have the capital to trade for a quarterback. Well, you're going to hope that you can come to your team next year or something. To me, it's like, you're going to step down in quarterback next year. You've no draft picks. You've no money to move around. No, without a shadow of a doubt, I think that Houston is in for a rough time. But
yeah, it's not good. It's not good. You just got to do whatever you can to make Deshaun happy, because as long as you have him, you have hope. That's all I'm trying to say to Houston. So Houston's at my number 5. And at number 4, this is where we see a step up in the competition, where teams that are not necessarily god awful bad, like the last 2 we just mentioned, but they got some upside to them. And at number 4, I've got Mark's favorite bird team that's not the Cardinals, the Atlanta Falcons, because I like this Falcons team a lot. And when they were having their struggles throughout the season, especially in the early portion, I kept pounding the table and screaming, they're too talented to be doing stuff like this. And I still believe that their offense has a lot of these playmakers. They still got Matt Ryan, who can still put up numbers. They got Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones. They got guys that can really still put up points, in that their defense does need a top to bottom makeover, in my opinion. And they do have that legend of a kicker in Younghoe Koo, who guided my fantasy football team to a lot of wins this year. So they have pieces there, but the head coach that comes in there does need to bring with them a strong culture to show them that they don't necessarily have to blow every fourth quarter lead that they have, that they have to, start from the ground up in that regard. But there's a lot to really like here in this Atlanta job, that they already have some pieces in place that you could go from a team that could, that was down on their luck the last couple of years, to be a team that can be competitive pretty quickly, in all honesty.
Yeah, as we kind of talk through these teams and have the same points again and again, I think that maybe this segment will become predictable to other people, because they might be thinking the same things. But I'm 100% on that board with that it's like the offense is ready to hit the ground running for whoever comes in there. Like, yeah, all right, I know we're going to get to Justin Herbert, I'm sure, in a minute, when it's like you have your quarterback of the future. Yeah, it kind of sucks that Matt Ryan is a bit older, but when you have young guys around him like Calvin Ridley, I don't know what the status with Todd Gurley and stuff is next year, but like, I'm sure these with them, but they just have a ton of talent there, and they had the talent to do it this year. And it was a cultural thing, like you said. So once they get the right coach, it's up to the coach to make this team successful, because the offense has the talent to do it anyway. So we'll talk about this. I will come back to Atlanta in a minute. One point that I do want to say, I was talking to Jelani about this, one of our guest pickers, really knowledgeable guy. I was asking him, where do you want to go with the head coach when it ultimately comes out? And yeah, he was kind of excited about, he mentioned Todd Bowles. And I was surprised. I said to him because that would be going with defense.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that they would want an offensive guy to take this offense and all the talent and, like I said, run with it
Mm-hmm.
versus they've had the defensive coordinator
Right.
looking after them in Dan Quinn, or defensive minded coordinator in Dan Quinn looking after them for the last couple of years, that I thought that they would just set out and go for the offense. But I suppose as a fan and as someone knowledgeable about the team, maybe he's been a bit smart saying, yeah, the offense should be able to look after itself. So let's go to defense, and, because that's where there's going to be holes.
Interesting. I like that. It's a different name, so it's very intriguing to me. I like that one. So
He said anyone but Joe Brady.
oh,
Yeah, I can kind of see where he's coming from.
we're getting some Joe Brady slander here at the very end of the show. All right. So next team up, number 3, the top 3 in my list. This is when it comes down to, what do you personally prefer? Do you like existing talent on a team, or do you like potential and draft picks? And I'm going to tip my hand here in what I like. I put the Chargers here at 3. The roster is loaded on both sides of the football, like Mark talked about a second ago when he mentioned Justin Herbert. You got your franchise quarterback figured out for the future. You have playmakers at wide receiver. You got playmakers on the defensive line. You got guys on the secondary that can make plays. You have talent that can come in and start winning immediately. And that is extremely appealing to a coach. And plus, it's the LA market. So you got a lot of glitz and glamour, but it's not crazy like a Philadelphia market or a New York market with the Giants or the Jets, where they're going to kill you over every tiny little thing. And with an organization like the Chargers that's proven it's extremely patient with guys like Anthony Lynn, who, he had one good season, then a couple bad ones before letting him go. So a coach can come in here and, really have some time to really work on a roster. But I like this Chargers roster already. We've talked about that a bunch this season, and this Chargers team could be one of those teams that could turn around immediately if they get the right guy at the helm. That's why I put them here at 3.
Couple of years removed from being a serious playoff contender when it just fell apart for Anthony Lynn in 2019. But I remember, and I said this at the beginning of the year, that I thought the Chargers were talented enough that year that they would have made a serious playoff push.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it comes down to the talent that's on the team. Like you alluded to, they have Justin Herbert, they have Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, who yards per carry wise always fantastic. And then the defense, they have Joey Bosa, and importantly, Derwin James, who was injured this year. So they just need the right guy to look after them. I suppose you say that it's not a crazy fan base, but I would also look at it being a bit fickle, that they don't actually have a lot of fans. The Rams are the ones that seem to have the LA market. So we all remember those scenes from the Pittsburgh game in 2019 when there was no LA fans at the game. It was all Pittsburgh. So that's something that's tough. But like you said, it's really important when you're looking at job security, the patience that is going to come with it. The one outlier, though, that's a drawback, and I have the Chargers number 3 in my list as well. But the drawback is that you're in the Chiefs division, and make the playoffs very tough.
Yeah, it makes and that's the one thing that a head coach has to come in and realize, that you have an unstoppable juggernaut that you have to play twice a year. You're not winning the division. I'm sorry, Chargers fans. I'm sorry, whoever you get. We're just gonna tell you now, you ain't winning the division. Just spoiler alert. So Chargers are at 3 for me.
It's worth transitioning into these final 2 teams with that note that these next 2 teams are in more open divisions, and certainly the Jets division is in complete. Well, I suppose the Bills are there, but it's still in that bit of flux that Miami is obviously after coming on the scene and making a push, but it's not New England's anymore.
Yeah. So like Mark said, there's only 2 teams left, the Jags and the Jets, and they don't really have a king of their division like the Chargers have with the Chiefs, where it's a foregone conclusion before you even ask the question, who's winning that division. The Bills are good, yes, but they're not dominant, overlords like the Patriots were for 20 years. At least not yet, Bills, at least not yet. Win a couple more divisions in a row, and then we'll start talking about you like that. But the number 2 team on my list is a team Mark just mentioned and name drop. It's the New York Football Jets. And listen, this team top to bottom needs a makeover, a remake, a reboot. And offensively, defensively, you name it, they need help at almost every position. Now, we don't know what they're going to do at quarterback after they lost out in the Trevor Lawrence sweepstakes. Are they going to trade back from number 2 and acquire picks to help build around Sam Darnold, or are they just going to ditch Sam Darnold in the woods and go get a new quarterback? The new head coach and GM combo are going to be the ones to decide that. But as a head coach, you got to come into the situation thinking that, it needs the top to bottom makeover. But out of almost every team on this list that we've named, the Jets are the closest, in my opinion, to being a completely blank canvas that you can remake it in your own image. And not just that, you already have the weaponry to do it, because the Jets have 2 first-round draft picks this year, Mark. They got their own pick at 2, and then they have the pick from Seattle from the Jamal Adams trade.
And they have an additional second for that as well. They've 2 firsts and 2 seconds.
Look at that. You already have the ammo if you want to start trading to get more picks, or if you want to sit there and take your guys. So if you're a coach, I know the New York market is extremely daunting, and it's tough, and they're very cold to people. But this job, for the ammo that they already have in place to go out and get guys, it's pretty solid looking, in my honest opinion. That's why I got the Jets here too.
I can see obviously where this is going, and so we're transitioning out of this.
Yeah.
The Jets have the second overall pick, and they've the second most cap space. They have the second most cap space as well. So that's a fantastic point to be at.
Mm-hmm.
It's just such a shame that Jacksonville, which is the remaining remaining head coaching position, has the most cap space and the first overall pick.
Yeah, honest to God, I didn't even think about that till you just mentioned it. Honest to God. But the positives, getting away from the Jets and talking about the number one coaching opening in this league, the Jacksonville Jaguars. The positives that we said about every team. Cap space is good. They got the draft picks, 2 first rounders and 2 second rounders, just like the Jets have. And guess what else they have, Mark? They got already some solid looking talent on the team. We blush so much about James Robinson. I personally like some of their wide receivers in DJ Chark and Laviska Shenault. And they've got young guys on defense like CJ Henderson and Kaylavin Chason who can still grow into something potentially good. They proved to be frisky with teams that were way superior to them this season. And we talked about them like, what are the Jags doing? They're being so frisky. This team, when you get the right guy and they finally have a quarterback figured out, because they're taking Trevor Lawrence, spoiler alert, people, in case you haven't figured that one out yet, this team isn't very far off from competing, in my honest opinion. In fact, I wouldn't be stunned if they start pulling upsets as soon as next year if they get the right guy at the mantle.
Oh, sorry. I think, yeah, 100%. I think for the exact reasons that you're saying there, they were super frisky already. It seemed like they knew how to just throw a game at the end of it. That was fantastic. I was actually just, as I was in my own world there, I was just Googling, was there any update with, was Jacksonville coming to London?
Oh, so you'd be excited to watch the Jaguars, huh?
No, I mean, like what we're saying there, probably the most open division in the NFL is perhaps the AFC South. So it's definitely, in terms of the attractiveness, we're saying they do have, like, they've kind of the sexy names ticked off there. I mean, James Robinson, we have to see what he grows into, but he could, I'm not going to call him a superstar yet because it could all fall apart in a year's time. But if he plays again like that, and the DJ Charks, the Laviska Shenault, I presume, was a first round pick, wasn't he, last year?
Yes, he was. Yep.
So, like, they have those sexy names that you're able to sell jerseys with. And then if you're able to add a Trevor Lawrence, it's like, yeah, you're going to have to, maybe it'll expose that they need some offensive line help. And they did bleed some of the good pieces on defense that, were 2 years removed from being a really fantastic, scary defense. But, or is it 3 years at this point now when they, your Calais Campbells and all of them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, they're kind of after going away from that, and there is a few more holes that they have to fill. But again, they have the most cap space. They have the best draft picks in each round. You have to factor that in. I mean, like, when you're picking first in the second round as well, the number 33 spot is like an extra first round pick. Right. So, yeah, I think that Jacksonville, New York deserved it because they're certainly the worst team, if that makes sense. Like, they needed the first overall pick more because Jacksonville has too many pieces that they won't be able to turn it around. We after our first 2 picks went pick for pick where we ranked those positions, where we ranked the teams. And I would be making a mistake if I came away from this segment without talking about something that I looked into last year, and I'll put this tweet back up on our Twitter. We'll link it to the promo for this. That not since 2005 as a first-year head coach not made the postseason. Now, I need to stress that one of the first-year head coaches always has gone on since 2005 to make the postseason. That's not saying they all go on, because I remember being tweeted at the time saying, am I reading this right? Every head coach that's in their first year go. No, that's not what I'm saying. But if we look at it, they try and continue this year with Kevin Stefanski getting the Browns there. Before that, it was Green Bay in 2009 going with Matt LaFleur. In 2018, it was Matt Nagy and Frank Reich. The year before that, it was McVay, Sean McDermott, and Doug Marrone. So one of these teams, history tells us, at least one of these teams, if not 2, is going to go to the playoffs next year. So, I mean, if we want to do a guessing game right now, I don't know, can Jacksonville do it that quickly? I mean, we saw the impact that the first round, or sorry, the quarterbacks, I should say, not even the first round quarterbacks, but yeah, the Joe Burrows and the Justin Herberts had on their teams this year. So Trevor Lawrence, if he's the most polished thing coming out since Andrew Luck, yeah, maybe they're able to turn it around that fast. I kind of look at LA that I just thought that they were a head coach away from being more competitive this year. So I wouldn't be surprised if LA are the ones to make the jump. And then the Atlanta Falcons, again, I thought they were going to be a bit competitive and frisky this year. I didn't have them quite as a Super Bowl team, or not a Super Bowl, a playoff team. When we were previewing the season, we said that they were third in that division. So, we're saying that they're talented, but they still have to go up against New Orleans, who Drew Brees could be gone potentially. Tom Brady, I mean, I don't think he's going to be gone, but this was the year that they're certainly all in for as well. So maybe it's going to be Atlanta. So it's one to mull over. I think we're going to talk about it in the off season, so maybe we don't need to give our definitive answers just yet.
You heard it here first, folks. The New York Jets will make the playoffs, according to Mark. So that's our coaching. I'm kidding.
I should mention though, like Joe Douglas is a really good GM, and I'm glad that he's going to be able to work with his choice of head coach now, because he always seemed to have been in a weird deal there, the way he landed in New York from Philadelphia, when he was a really prized possession there in Philadelphia when they went on their Super Bowl run.
There has been a surprising amount of Joe Douglas support from Jets Twitter. I'm just not used to them being positive about stuff. That's why it's always so off-putting to me. But anyway, that's our little coaching carousel segment on top of our wildcard preview. So that's it for today's show, everyone. We will be back next week to preview the full divisional slate. So we'll see who's left standing at the end of Super Wildcard Weekend, what they've been calling it on TV.
Why is it Super Wildcard?
Have you not heard that? They've been calling it Super Wildcard Weekend.
I've heard them calling it, but I'm like, why? Just because there's the extra. I didn't understand
that. Now it's super.
Yeah, that one, because there seemed to be anyone associated with the NFL and NFL Network put out that same screenshot of the PR piece that was put out breaking down what games are played when.
Yeah.
And I was like, why is this piece of paper, why is this bit of type so important, bragging about it being a Super Walker? Why can't you just put up the slate of games? That's all we're here to know about. We don't need to know that it's the Super Walker.
It's super. They literally just put up a graphic on my TV about Super Wildcard Weekend. I swear to God. Jesus.
It's a weird one for me. I don't quite understand why. I suppose that's the American marketing system for it.
Yeah, everything's got to be supersized, man. So that's it for our preview show. That's Mark, and I'm Hayden, and we will see you all back here next week for a divisional round preview. Bye.